My stepdaughter looked me dead in the eye at my own Thanksgiving table and mocked my late mother being a waitress. When I calmly asked her to watch her tone, my husband slammed his wine glass down. "She is not your daughter," he snapped in front of his entire snickering family. "Do not correct her." I just smiled, set down my napkin, and walked away. They had no idea that by the time they finished their pumpkin pie, I had logged into my banking portal and canceled her car payments, her university tuition, his black card, and his mother's monthly allowance. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to entitled people who mistook your generosity for weakness. I am Olivia, 42 years old, and a senior wealth management consultant. For the past 5 years, I have been married to David, a man who projected the image of a highly successful businessman. He fit perfectly into the wealthy country club aesthetic, along with his mother Martha, his sister Jessica, and his 19-year-old daughter Chloe. David loved to play the big shot at charity galas, handing out business cards and talking about his corporate ventures. But I knew the reality behind his tailored suits. We hosted Thanksgiving this year at my home, a sprawling 6-bedroom estate in a premium gated community that I purchased with my hard-earned money long before David and I ever crossed paths. The dining room was set with crystal glasses and fine china, a perfect backdrop for Martha to hold court. She loved to boast about her old money lineage, completely ignoring the fact that her designer lifestyle was currently funded entirely by my consulting income. We were halfway through the main course when the conversation shifted. Chloe, sipping a glass of expensive wine she was technically too young to drink, began complaining about the service at a local boutique. She rolled her eyes and leaned back in her upholstered chair. The salesgirl was so clueless, Chloe laughed. She had dirt under her nails. "Honestly, she reminded me of those stories you tell about your mom, Olivia. You know, the one who scrubbed diner floors to buy your cheap school clothes? It is just so pathetic how poor people act like they do not even know how to exist in polite society." Martha and Jessica immediately snickered, exchanging amused glances over their wine glasses. I felt a cold knot form in my chest. My mother had worked double shifts at a diner to make sure I could go to college and build the career I have today. I looked directly at Chloe, keeping my voice perfectly even. "Chloe, that is incredibly disrespectful. You will watch your tone when speaking about my mother in my house." The laughter around the table died instantly. Chloe pouted, looking immediately to her father to play the victim. David did exactly what he always did. He slammed his heavy crystal wine glass down onto the mahogany table, the dark red liquid splashing over the rim and staining the white linen tablecloth. He pointed a rigid finger directly at my face. "She is not your daughter," he shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Do not ever speak to her that way. You do not correct her. You have no right to discipline my child." I looked around the table. Chloe was smirking triumphantly, swirling her wine. Martha was nodding in agreement, her chin raised in that familiar elitist way. Jessica was busy cutting her turkey, pretending not to notice, but a faint smile played on her lips. They were a united front, a family of parasites who looked down on the very woman feeding them, clothing them, and putting a roof over their heads. In the past, I might have argued. I might have tried to reason with David, pointing out that paying $70,000 for Chloe's luxury car and $40,000 a semester for her private university should at least buy me the basic respect of not having my dead mother insulted. But sitting there looking at David's red, angry face, something fundamental shifted inside me. The illusion I had been maintaining for 5 years completely evaporated. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice or throw a tantrum. I did not demand an apology from a girl who had never worked a day in her life or a man who was secretly living on my dime. I simply picked up my linen napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it next to my plate. "You are absolutely right," I said, my voice eerily calm. "She is not my daughter." I stood up, pushing my chair back. I turned my back on the silent table and walked out of the dining room without another word. I walked straight up the sweeping staircase to my home office and locked the heavy oak door behind me. I sat down at my custom glass desk, opened my laptop, and logged directly into my primary wealth management portal. The screen illuminated the dark room, displaying the massive sums of money I managed and generated. David thought his harsh words had put me in my place. He thought I would retreat to our bedroom and cry until I was ready to apologize to them. He forgot that numbers do not have feelings, and I controlled all the numbers in this family. My fingers flew across the keyboard. First, I went to the auto-pay settings. With one click, the monthly payments for Chloe's luxury BMW were canceled. Next, I navigated to the joint accounts where I had graciously issued secondary cards. I found David's exclusive black credit card and clicked the button to freeze it permanently. Then I opened the university portal. The winter semester tuition for Chloe was scheduled to be drafted on Monday. I canceled the authorization and completely removed my banking details from her student profile. Finally, I went to the recurring transfers. Every first of the month, a generous sum labeled Family Trust was automatically wired to Martha and Jessica to maintain their country club facade. I deleted the transfer rules entirely. I closed the laptop, listening to the faint sound of laughter drifting up from the dining room below. Let them laugh. Let them eat the expensive meal I paid for. Tomorrow morning, their entire world was going to come crashing down, and I was going to enjoy watching every single second of it. The days of me buying their affection were officially over. The crisp November morning broke with a deceptive stillness. The lingering scent of roasted turkey and expensive wine from the previous night's disaster still hung in the air of the lower halls. I woke up early, entirely refreshed after the best night of sleep I had experienced in 5 years. I wrapped myself in my silk robe, walked into my private master bathroom, and brewed a double espresso. I took my time savoring the rich aroma, feeling a profound sense of peace. That peace was violently shattered exactly at 8 in the morning by a piercing, hysterical shriek echoing from the circular driveway below. I stepped out onto the marble balcony adjoining the master suite and looked down. The morning frost was still melting off the manicured lawn, but the real spectacle was taking place right in front of the grand entrance. A heavy-duty industrial tow truck was currently backing up with ruthless precision toward a pristine pearl-white BMW. It was the exact $70,000 vehicle I had purchased for Chloe on her 18th birthday, a gift she had complained about because it did not have the upgraded leather stitching she wanted. Chloe was sprinting across the driveway in her designer pajamas, waving her arms frantically and screaming at the top of her lungs. "You cannot take that. Stop. That is my car. My dad is going to sue you." She threw herself at the hood of the vehicle, acting as if the tow truck driver was stealing her actual soul. The driver, a burly man wearing a high-visibility vest, simply chewed his gum and continued operating the hydraulic lift. He had clearly dealt with entitled teenagers before and remained entirely unbothered by her performance. The heavy oak door of my bedroom flew open, hitting the wall with a loud thud. David stormed into the room, his face flushed, wearing nothing but his sweatpants and a panicked expression. He marched straight toward the balcony doors. "Olivia, what the hell is going on out there?" he demanded, pointing a shaking finger toward the window. "The bank must have made a mistake. Chloe is down there crying her eyes out because some lunatic is trying to steal her car. Get your phone right now and call customer service. Tell them to authorize the payment immediately. Fix this." I did not flinch. I did not move toward my phone. I simply took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso, letting the warm liquid coat my throat. I looked at him over the rim of my cup, matching his frantic energy with absolute freezing calm. "Why would I do that?" I asked smoothly. "Because it is her car," he yelled, taking a step toward me. "Because you are supposed to pay the lease. You set up the auto-pay. Just fix it before the neighbors see what is happening." I set my espresso cup down on the small bistro table. I looked him dead in the eye and let the words roll off my tongue with perfect clarity. "She is not my daughter. I am not financially responsible for her." David froze. The color drained from his face as the realization hit him. I was throwing his exact words from the Thanksgiving table right back into his face. He opened his mouth to argue, but the sound of hydraulic gears whining from the driveway interrupted him. Panic overtook his anger. He spun around, grabbed his wallet from the nightstand, and bolted out the bedroom door, intent on playing the wealthy savior. I followed him out to the balcony to watch the show unfold. David burst out the front door, puffing his chest out as he approached the tow truck driver. He wrapped a comforting arm around a sobbing Chloe and glared at the man in the vest. "Release the vehicle immediately," David commanded, using his best imitation of a powerful corporate executive. "My wife made a banking error. I will handle the payment right now, plus a generous tip for your inconvenience." He whipped out his heavy metal black card with a flourish, holding it out as if it were a magic wand that could bend reality to his will. The driver shrugged, pulled a mobile payment terminal from his pocket, and took the card. Chloe wiped her tears, looking smugly up at her father. "Daddy always fixes everything," she sniffled, glaring up at the balcony where I was standing. The driver swiped the heavy metal card. A harsh error beep echoed in the quiet morning air. He frowned, tapped the screen, and swiped it a second time. Another loud beep. "Decline," the driver said flatly, handing the card back to David. David's confident posture vanished. "That is impossible," he stammered, snatching the card back. "Try it again. The machine must be broken. Do you have any idea what the limit is on that account?" "The machine works fine, buddy." The driver chuckled, shaking his head. "Card is dead. Maybe call your bank instead of yelling at me. I have a schedule to keep." With a loud clank, the tow truck secured the BMW's front wheels. The hydraulic lift engaged, hoisting the luxury car into the air. Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream, dropping to her knees on the cold driveway. "My car. You are ruining my life. How am I supposed to get to campus? I cannot take the bus like a peasant." David stood paralyzed, staring at his useless black card. The illusion of his wealth, the facade he had meticulously maintained in front of his daughter and his neighbors, was cracking wide open. The tow truck engine roared to life, and the driver pulled away, taking the $70,000 symbol of Chloe's entitlement down the street and out of sight. I watched David frantically tap the screen of his phone, desperately trying to log into the banking app. He realized he was completely locked out. He looked up at me on the balcony, his eyes wide with a mixture of rage and terror. He stormed back inside the house, charging up the stairs and bursting into the bedroom a second time. "Are you out of your mind?" David screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "You blocked my card. You humiliated me in front of my daughter and the entire neighborhood. Turn those accounts back on right now, or I swear to God." Before he could finish his threat, his phone started ringing loudly in his hand. The caller identification flashed brightly on the screen. It was Martha, his mother. In his frantic, trembling state, David fumbled with the screen and accidentally hit the speakerphone button instead of answering it normally. Martha's shrill, panicked voice instantly filled the bedroom. "David, what on earth is going on with your accounts?" she shrieked, her voice breathless with indignation. "I am standing at the front desk of the country club. I just finished having brunch with the ladies, and the club manager pulled me aside in front of everyone. He told me my annual membership renewal bounced. He asked me for another form of payment right in the middle of the lobby. Do you know how embarrassing that was?" The entire table heard him. "You need to wire the family trust money immediately." David stood completely motionless, the phone shaking in his hand. His jaw went slack. The prestigious country club was Martha's entire world, her primary source of social validation, and now she had been publicly exposed as unable to pay her dues. The great provider David had failed. He slowly lowered the phone, the color entirely gone from his face. He looked at me, realizing for the very first time that he had absolutely zero control. I picked up my espresso, took another slow sip, and smiled. I turned my back on David's terrified face and walked slowly down the grand, curving staircase. I wanted a front row seat for what was coming next. I barely set my espresso cup down before the heavy mahogany front doors suddenly swung violently open. Martha marched inside, tightly clutching her designer handbag like a weapon. Behind her was Jessica, wearing oversized sunglasses and a furious scowl. They had clearly driven straight from the country club, faces flushed with righteous indignation. "David," Martha shrieked, ignoring my presence entirely as she shouted up the staircase. "Get down here right now. My reputation is in ruins. I had to leave my bridge club sitting in the dining room while the manager escorted me out like a common criminal." David scrambled down the stairs, practically tripping over his own 2 feet like a cornered animal. Jessica crossed her arms. "It is not just your country club, mother," she snapped. "I tried to pay the caterer for my boutique's holiday launch party this morning, and the transaction declined. The wire transfer reversed. David, what is going on with the company dividends? You promised the family trust disbursements would clear yesterday. I have vendors threatening to walk out on me. David stood on the bottom step, completely surrounded by the angry, demanding women of his family. The pressure was suffocating him. He looked at Martha, then at Jessica, and finally his desperate gaze landed on me. I watched the gears turn in his head as he desperately searched for a way out of the lie he had been maintaining for years. He chose the coward's way out. "It is Olivia!" David yelled, pointing an accusing finger in my direction. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project false authority. "She is having some sort of severe hormonal breakdown. She lost her mind over a disagreement at dinner last night and hacked into my corporate accounts. She froze my assets to punish me. I am calling the bank right now to report her for financial fraud." Martha whipped her head around to glare at me, her eyes narrowing with absolute disgust. "I always knew you were unstable, Olivia," she hissed. "You are just jealous of this family. How dare you throw a temper tantrum and interfere with my son's business finances? You need to log into whatever system you hacked and restore his access immediately." Jessica scoffed, adjusting her sunglasses on top of her head. "Honestly, it is pathetic. You make a little bit of money consulting, and suddenly you think you can control David's corporate wealth. Give him back his company funds right now, or I swear I will call the police myself." I did not raise my voice or defend my sanity. I simply turned around, opened the top drawer of the console table, and pulled out a thick manila folder. I had anticipated this exact confrontation and prepared the documentation weeks ago. I walked over to Martha and shoved the folder against her chest. "Go ahead and open it," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing whisper. "Take a very close look at where your precious family trust money actually comes from." Martha snatched the folder, her hands trembling with rage. She ripped open the flap and pulled out a stack of highlighted bank statements. Jessica leaned over her mother's shoulder, scanning the columns of numbers and routing details. The silence that fell over the foyer was absolutely deafening. "Read the sender details out loud," Martha, I commanded. "Read the name on the account that has been paying your country club dues, your property taxes, and Jessica's fake boutique expenses for the last 3 years." Martha's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The color completely drained from her cheeks. The documents clearly showed that the monthly transfers were not corporate dividends. They were not business disbursements from David's tech company. Every single cent came directly from my personal wealth management account. "This cannot be right," Jessica stammered, grabbing one of the pages. "David said his company was funding the trust. He said he was taking care of us." "David's company went bankrupt 3 years ago," I stated loudly, watching David physically shrink against the staircase railing. "He has not had a single penny to his name since. I have been paying for your extravagant lifestyles out of the goodness of my heart. But since I am apparently just an unstable, jealous outsider who hacked his accounts, my charity ends today. You are cut off, both of you." David opened his mouth to formulate another pathetic excuse, but before he could speak, the front doors burst open for the second time that morning. Chloe rushed into the foyer, tripping over the threshold. She was sobbing hysterically, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark, messy streaks. She was clutching her smartphone so tightly her knuckles were white. She ignored Martha and Jessica, completely running straight toward her father. "Dad, you have to fix this right now," Chloe screamed, her voice cracking with pure panic. "I just got an emergency email from the university bursar office." David looked like he was going to vomit. "What happened?" he whispered. "My tuition payment bounced," Chloe sobbed, waving her phone in his face. "The $40,000 wire transfer was rejected. The email says I am officially suspended for non-payment. My student ID badge has been deactivated. They told me I am barred from entering the campus, and I have to clear out my dorm room by noon. You need to call them. You need to send the money." David stared at his weeping daughter, his angry mother, and his furious sister. The grand illusion of the wealthy family patriarch had been entirely dismantled in less than 10 minutes. He had absolutely no money, no power, and nowhere left to hide. I smiled, turned on my heel, and walked toward the kitchen to pour myself another cup of coffee. The real show was just getting started. I had barely poured the fresh coffee when David stomped into the kitchen. The panic in his eyes had been replaced by a familiar, desperate aggression. He slammed his hand against the marble island, rattling my favorite ceramic mug. "You think this is a game, Olivia?" he snarled, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. "You think you can just cut off my family and embarrass me like that? I am giving you one chance to fix this. You will log back into those accounts. You will wire the money to the university, and you will reinstate my mother's allowance. If you do not do exactly what I say right now, I am calling my lawyer. I will file for divorce today. I will take half of this house, half of your business, and every single asset you think you control. You will be left with absolutely nothing." I took a slow sip of my coffee, relishing the rich flavor. He was relying on the empty threats that usually terrified women in my position. He assumed I was a traditional wife who feared the financial ruin of a messy divorce. He had fundamentally misunderstood who he married. I walked past him, went straight to the hall closet, and pulled out a large, empty silver suitcase. I dragged it across the hardwood floor and slid it forcefully across the kitchen tiles. It collided directly with his designer loafers. "Start packing," I said smoothly. "You have exactly 30 minutes to get your things out of my house before I activate the security system and have you arrested for trespassing." David stared at the suitcase, his jaw hanging open. He looked back at me, waiting for me to crack, waiting for the tears or the bargaining. When he realized I was completely serious, his face contorted with rage. He grabbed the handle of the suitcase and stormed upstairs. Within 20 minutes, he had thrown whatever designer suits and watches he could carry into the bag. He herded his weeping daughter, his furious mother, and his scowling sister out the front door. They piled into Martha's luxury sedan and peeled out of the driveway, heading straight for Martha's estate in the gated community across town. The house fell wonderfully silent, but the digital war was just beginning. By early afternoon, my phone screen began lighting up like a slot machine. The notifications were relentless. David had wasted absolutely no time weaponizing his country club network. I opened my social media apps and saw a massive multi-paragraph post tagged with my name. It was authored by David and shared instantly by Martha, Jessica, and Chloe. The post was a masterclass in manipulation and victimhood. "To all our dear friends and colleagues," David wrote. "It brings me immense pain to share that my family is currently enduring a severe domestic crisis. My wife Olivia has suffered a catastrophic mental break. She has illegally locked me out of my own corporate wealth management accounts and is attempting to hold my hard-earned financial assets hostage. She has cruelly cut off my innocent daughter's college tuition and left my elderly mother without her basic living expenses. We are praying for Olivia's mental health, but I cannot allow this gold-digging behavior to destroy the family empire I built from the ground up." The post was instantly flooded with comments from the local high society wives, wealthy executives, and country club gossips. My private messages quickly became a cesspool of judgment. Women I had politely shared mimosas with at charity galas were suddenly sending me vicious texts. "How could you do this to David?" one message read. "You are a monster for attacking a young girl's education," read another. I even received a message from a prominent local socialite telling me that my working-class roots were finally showing and that I was a disgrace to their refined community. A weaker woman might have panicked. A weaker woman might have rushed to issue a public statement or called a lawyer to demand the post be taken down. I did neither of those things. I simply switched my phone to silent, tossed it onto the kitchen counter, and went upstairs to shower. I chose a sharp, tailored navy blue business suit and a pair of intimidating stiletto heels. I applied my makeup with meticulous precision. Their pathetic social media smear campaign was nothing more than the desperate flailing of cornered parasites. Let them type their little lies. Let the country club housewives gasp and gossip over their afternoon tea. None of it mattered, because the legal and financial reality was entirely in my hands. I picked up my briefcase, walked out to my car, and drove to my corporate office building. I had just settled into my executive suite on the 40th floor when the intercom on my desk buzzed sharply. It was the head of building security. "Ms. Olivia," the guard said, his voice tense. "We have a situation in the main lobby. There is a woman here named Jessica. She is claiming to be your sister-in-law, and she is causing a massive scene. She is screaming at the receptionist and threatening to call the local news stations if you do not come down here immediately." She says you owe her $15,000 for a European vacation, and she refuses to leave the premises until you hand over a check. I leaned back in my leather chair and let out a soft, amused sigh. Jessica was always the least intelligent member of David's family, completely driven by her blinding greed and astonishing lack of self-awareness. Instead of hiding in shame after the morning's revelations, she had actually marched into a high-security corporate environment to demand a luxury vacation fund from the woman she was actively trashing on the internet. "Tell security not to touch her," I replied evenly into the intercom. "Do not call the police just yet. I am coming down to the lobby. I will handle Jessica myself." I grabbed a folder, smoothed my jacket, and headed for the elevator. The descent took 45 seconds. I smoothed my navy suit and held the white folder tightly. I felt no anxiety, only the sharp focus of a predator. The elevator chimed, revealing my corporate headquarters lobby. Jessica stood in the atrium, creating a pathetic spectacle. She wore designer sunglasses indoors, clutching a handbag I paid for, and screamed. Two security guards tried to box her in. "I want my money," Jessica screeched, stamping her foot. "You tell that witch to come down here." She canceled my automatic transfer. "I have deposits for my Amalfi trip. I am not leaving until I get my check. I will call local news. I will tell them how the wealth consultant treats her family." Executives paused near the turnstiles, watching with second-hand embarrassment. I stepped out, my heels echoing. "Stand down, gentlemen," I said clearly. The guards stepped back, relieved. Jessica whipped around, ripping her sunglasses off. "There you are," she snarled, pointing her finger like a weapon. "You have nerve freezing my travel funds. David promised me that money. I have a brand image to maintain, and I need European content for social media. You are going to write me a check right now, plus 5,000 for emotional distress, or I will ruin your reputation forever." I stopped 3 feet away from her, letting my gaze drift down to her shoes. I spoke at a volume calibrated for the lobby to hear. "You are throwing a temper tantrum in a corporate lobby because your sister-in-law stopped funding your vacations," I stated, ensuring the absurdity hung in the air. "Are you not 40 years old, Jessica? It is embarrassing that you still rely on an allowance from me to pretend you belong to the upper class." A few muffled laughs broke out. Jessica went entirely rigid. The reality of how she looked to the wealthy professionals surrounding us pierced her bubble of entitlement. Her face burned red. "How dare you speak to me like that?" she hissed, lowering her voice as she realized people were listening. "David is going to destroy you for this. Give me my money. My boutique needs capital." "Your boutique," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You mean that failing storefront downtown that has not turned a profit in 4 years? The one David bragged about funding, even though every inventory invoice was paid directly from my checking account." Jessica crossed her arms. "It is a legitimate business." I smiled warmly, holding up the white folder. "Is it, Jessica? Let us talk about legitimate business practices." I stepped closer, invading her personal space. I pushed the folder against her chest, forcing her to grab it. I kept my voice low, a venomous whisper meant only for her ears. "Open it," I commanded softly. Jessica fumbled with the flap, her bravado faltering. She pulled out printed financial records and tax returns. Her eyes darted over the pages, and I watched the exact moment her breathing stopped. "You see, Jessica?" I continued, my voice smooth. "When you run a business, you file taxes. And for the last 3 years, you have been claiming the cash gifts I gave you as business income. You used my charity to artificially inflate your boutique revenue so you could qualify for business loans you never intended to pay back." She stared at the papers, her mouth opening and closing. "That is federal tax fraud," I whispered. "It is a felony. The IRS takes a dim view of people who launder family gifts to commit bank fraud. I have every single bank statement proving the origin of those funds. I have the paper trail wrapped up with a neat little bow." Jessica began to shake. The designer handbag slipped from her shoulder, dangling loosely. "You cannot do this," she breathed, her eyes wide with terror. "I would go to prison." I leaned back, smoothing my jacket. "If you or your mother or your brother post one more lie about me on the internet, if you send me one more threatening text message, or if you ever show your face in my place of business again, I am mailing that folder to the IRS. I will personally ensure you trade those designer clothes for an orange jumpsuit. I gestured toward the revolving glass doors. Get out of my lobby. Jessica did not say another word. She clutched the folder to her chest, spun around, and ran toward the exit. She pushed through the doors so fast she nearly tripped, sprinting down the sidewalk and disappearing into the crowd. The lobby was dead quiet. I turned to the head of security who was watching me with wide eyes. If she ever comes back, bypass the police and call animal control, I said. I was turning to head back to the elevator when a young man in a courier uniform rushed through the doors holding a thick envelope. He scanned the lobby, his eyes landing on me. Are you Olivia? He asked. I nodded. He handed me a clipboard to sign, traded it for the envelope, and hurried out. I glanced at the return address printed in bold black ink. It was from a sleazy law firm known for handling desperate divorces. I walked back into the elevator, pressing the button for the 40th floor. As the cab ascended, I tore open the envelope. It was a formal extortion demand from David Attorney. The document was filled with aggressive legal jargon threatening to drag my name through the mud unless I met their terms immediately. I read the specific demands and let out a genuine, ringing laugh. David was demanding $50,000 a month in spousal support. He was demanding exclusive ownership of the mansion. I was demanding I pay for his lawyer fees. He had no idea what trap he had just blindly walked into. I stepped out of the elevator on the 40th floor, clutching the extortion letter in my manicured hand. The pristine glass doors of my executive suite slid open, and I walked straight into my private conference room. Sitting at the long mahogany table was Sarah, my lead corporate attorney, an absolute bulldog in the courtroom. She wore a tailored crimson pantsuit, her laptop already open, projecting a spreadsheet of my holding company assets onto the wall monitor. I tossed the thick manila envelope onto the table right in front of her. Read it and weep, I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. Or rather, read it and laugh. Sarah picked up the document, adjusting her reading glasses. Her eyes scanned the aggressive legal jargon, the bolded demands for $50,000 a month in spousal support, the audacious claim to my gated mansion, and the demand that I cover his legal fees. A slow, sharp smile spread across her face. She dropped the papers onto the polished wood and let out a rich, echoing laugh that filled the room. He hired the lowest-rated divorce attorney in the city. Sarah chuckled, tapping her pen against the ridiculous demand letter. This guy advertises on highway billboards at 2 in the morning. David must have found him by searching for lawyers who do not require an upfront retainer. It is completely pathetic. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the crystal pitcher on the table. He is desperate, I replied. He genuinely thinks he can scare me into submission by threatening a messy public divorce. He believes he still holds the cards because he spent the last 3 years playing the wealthy tech CEO for his country club friends. He forgot who actually owns the deck. Sarah opened her briefcase and pulled out a heavy leather-bound binder. She opened it to a document stamped with a bright red seal. Let us remind him of reality, she said, sliding the ironclad post-nuptial agreement toward me. 3 years ago, David sat in this exact room, sweating through his custom suit, begging you to save his life. I traced my finger over his shaky signature at the bottom of the page. The memories flooded back, not as exposition, but as hard, undeniable facts printed in black and white. 3 years ago, David's tech company had secretly gone bankrupt. He had hidden the massive financial failure from his mother, his sister, and his daughter, desperately trying to maintain his image as the family provider. He had racked up $2 million in debt, including unpaid payroll taxes that were about to trigger a federal investigation. He was staring down the barrel of a federal prison sentence. I paid his $2 million debt in full, I stated, my voice devoid of any pity. I kept him out of a jail cell. I kept his precious mother from finding out her golden boy was a total fraud. But my charity came with a permanent price tag. Sarah tapped the clause highlighted in yellow. The post-nuptial agreement transferred 100% of his company's shares to your holding limited liability company. It transferred the deed to the mansion entirely into your name. It legally classified all current and future assets as your sole and separate property. David legally relinquished all rights to alimony or spousal support in the event of a divorce. In the eyes of the law, David is a salaried employee of your holding company. The only things he actually owns are his clothes and his golf clubs. Hi is completely delusional, Sarah continued, leaning back in her leather chair. Sending this demand letter is legally laughable. But here is my professional advice. Do not respond to it. Do not send this post-nuptial agreement back to his discount lawyer just yet. Let him officially file the divorce petition. Let him submit his financial disclosures to the court under penalty of perjury. Let him swear on a legal affidavit that he owns a company he has not owned in 3 years. I smiled, understanding her ruthless strategy perfectly. You want him to commit perjury on public record. Exactly, Sarah said, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. Let him dig his own grave. He will go to his mother, to his sister, to the entire country club, bragging about how he is going to take you for everything you have. He will build this massive public house of cards. And the moment he steps into the courtroom and tries to claim those assets under oath, we drop the hammer. We counter-sue for legal fees, present the post-nuptial agreement to the judge, and watch him get investigated for attempting to defraud the court. The financial and legal devastation will be absolute. It was a flawless plan. David's greatest weakness was his blinding arrogance. He would never admit to his cheap lawyer that he had signed away his entire empire 3 years ago, because that would require admitting he was a failure. He would march right into a courtroom relying on bluff and bluster, and I would gladly let the judge hand him the shovel to finish digging his own grave. I was about to finalize the strategy with Sarah when my smartphone suddenly vibrated violently against the mahogany table. The screen flashed bright red with an urgent notification from my advanced home security system. A motion sensor had been triggered at the front entrance of my mansion. I frowned and tapped the notification, pulling up the live high-definition video feed on my screen. I leaned forward, my eyes narrowing at the live footage. Standing on my front porch was Chloe. She was shivering in the cold, clutching her phone. Standing right beside her was her obnoxious frat boy boyfriend. And next to them was a man wearing a tool belt, actively kneeling in front of my custom oak doors with a set of lockpicks. She hired a locksmith, I stated. Sarah leaned over my shoulder, staring at the security feed glowing on my screen. I did not waste a single second. I picked up my phone and dialed emergency services, calmly reporting an active break-in at my address. I informed the dispatcher that the intruders had hired a professional locksmith to bypass a high-security system and requested immediate police intervention. I stood up, grabbing my coat. Sarah gave me a knowing nod. The drive from my downtown corporate office to the gated community took exactly 18 minutes. I pulled my car into the driveway right as 2 local police cruisers arrived, their blue and red lights flashing against the pristine landscaping of my estate. The locksmith had managed to remove the outer plate of the smart lock, but froze completely when the officers stepped out of their vehicles. Chloe whipped around, her face pale, but her survival instinct kicked in immediately. She forced a torrential flood of fake tears and ran straight toward the nearest police officer, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Officer, thank goodness you are here," Chloe sobbed, clinging to the arm of her frat boy boyfriend, who looked incredibly uncomfortable. My evil stepmother changed the locks and kicked me out onto the street. She is trying to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of my personal property. All my Chanel and Hermes bags are inside that house. My dad bought them for me, and she is holding them hostage. She is trying to rob me. The officer held up a hand to pause her frantic rambling, then turned his stern gaze toward me. "Ma'am, do you reside at this property?" he asked, his hand resting near his utility belt. I stepped forward, projecting absolute authority. "I am the sole legal owner of this property," I replied evenly. "This young woman is my husband's daughter. She does not pay rent, she is not on the deed, and she is no longer a welcome guest in my home. She brought a locksmith here to unlawfully enter." Chloe shrieked, stomping her designer boots on the pavement. "That is a lie. My expensive bags are in my bedroom. You cannot keep my property." The second officer pulled out his notepad. "Ma'am, if her personal belongings are inside, we have to allow her to retrieve them." I smiled a cold, calculating smile. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and opened my private email vault. I tapped the screen and held it out for the officers to see. I am happy to let her take anything she actually owns, I stated calmly. However, those luxury bags do not belong to her. Here are the digital receipts, the purchase orders, and the authentication certificates from the Hermes and Chanel boutiques. Every single item she claims as her own was purchased on my personal credit cards. They are registered under my name and my luxury client profile. She was simply allowed to borrow them while living under my roof. My generosity is revoked. The officers scrolled through the undeniable digital proof. The lead officer handed the phone back to me and turned to Chloe, his expression hardening into a severe scowl. "Listen to me very closely, young lady," he warned, his voice sharp. "You do not own those items. You do not own this house. If you take one more step toward that door, I am arresting you for trespassing and attempted grand larceny. You need to leave this property right now." The locksmith, realizing he was an accessory to a felony, hastily threw his tools into his bag and sprinted toward his van without waiting for payment. Chloe gasped, her face flushing bright red with complete humiliation. She turned to her boyfriend, grabbing his jacket sleeve for support. "Baby, do not let them do this to me," she whined. "Tell them my dad is rich. Tell them my dad will fix this." The frat boy physically recoiled, prying her fingers off his jacket like she was covered in a contagious disease. He looked at the police, then at me, and finally at Chloe with utter disgust. "Are you kidding me?" he scoffed loudly. "You told me you were a trust fund baby. You told me your dad owned a massive tech company and this whole estate belonged to your family. You are completely broke. You are literally getting kicked out onto the street and you do not even own your own purses. I am out of here." He turned on his heel and walked briskly down the sidewalk, not looking back once as he abandoned her. Chloe shrieked his name, but he ignored her, leaving her standing alone on the curb, sobbing in absolute disgrace as the officers watched her failure unfold. I walked past her, unlocking my door with a quick code and shut it firmly behind me. While Chloe wept on the sidewalk, a completely different disaster was brewing downtown. David had spent the entire morning formulating his grand retaliation. He marched through the towering glass doors of the corporate office building, adjusting his silk tie and projecting the arrogant aura of a powerful chief executive officer. He intended to barge straight into the executive boardroom, rally his loyal board of directors, and demand my immediate removal. He approached the VIP security turnstiles, pulling his laminated executive keycard from his breast pocket. He slapped the card against the biometric scanner without breaking his confident stride. The scanner emitted a harsh, buzzing rejection tone. The turnstile glass remained solidly locked in place. David frowned, annoyed by the minor inconvenience, and slapped the card against the scanner a second time. The machine flashed a bright red light. "Denied." David slammed his hand against the barrier, his face red. "Open this gate right now," he shouted at the lobby security guards. The head guard looked at him with an expression of pure, cold indifference. "Your access has been revoked permanently." "Permanently," the guard stated loudly. "You are trespassing." "Do you know who I am?" David screamed at the lobby security guard, his voice cracking. "I pay your salary." The head guard crossed his arms, unfazed by the tantrum. "My screen says your employee access was terminated this morning," the guard replied flatly. "Employee," he scoffed. "I am the chief executive officer. There is a board meeting on the top floor and I will be there." Before the guard could step out to restrain him, junior analysts scanned their badges at the turnstile. The barriers opened. David seized the opportunity, shoving his way past a startled intern and sprinting through the open gate. The guard shouted, reaching for his radio, but David was already diving into an open elevator and hitting the button for the top floor. As the elevator rose, David fixed his tie. He was going to walk straight into that boardroom and demand loyalty. He would tell them his unstable wife was sabotaging the firm out of hysterical jealousy. He would rally his wealthy peers, freeze Olivia out of the corporate accounts, and humiliate her into submission. The elevator dinged. David marched down the hallway, ignoring the confused administrative assistants. He reached the primary boardroom doors and shoved them open with a dramatic push. "Gentlemen, we have a massive internal crisis," David announced loudly, stepping into the room. "My wife has suffered a complete psychological break. She is actively attempting to interfere with our financial operations, and I need an immediate board resolution to block her access to all corporate funds. The boardroom was dead silent. There was absolutely nothing but the chilling silence of 12 highly paid corporate directors staring at him with expressions ranging from pity to profound discomfort. David finally lowered his gaze to the oak conference table. Sitting at the very head of the table in the oversized leather chair reserved strictly for the chief executive officer was Olivia. She wore a flawless crimson business dress, her hands neatly folded over a stack of manila folders. Flanking her were her powerhouse attorney Sarah and the firm's chief financial officer. "What the hell are you doing in my chair?" David barked, marching toward her. "Get out of this room immediately. This is a private corporate meeting." I did not move a single muscle. I kept my eyes locked on his flushed, sweating face. "It is a private corporate meeting." I agreed smoothly, my voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "Which is exactly why you need to leave. You were not invited, David." David scoffed, slamming his hands flat on the polished table. "I am the owner of this company," he yelled, looking around at the silent board members. "Richard Marcus, tell this crazy woman to get out of my seat." Richard, a senior board member who frequently partnered with David on the golf course, awkwardly cleared his throat and looked down at his legal pad. "David," he said quietly, "we have just been reviewing the ownership documentation provided by the holding company." David frowned, his arrogant facade slipping a fraction. "What holding company?" I slid the first manila folder across the table until it stopped right in front of his hands. I opened my own copy. "Let us clear up this little delusion you have been living in for 36 months, I stated clearly. 3 years ago, you drove this enterprise into a brick wall. You racked up $2 million in debt and nearly faced federal indictment for unpaid payroll taxes. I bailed you out. I paid your debts. But in exchange, you signed an irrevocable postnuptial agreement." I gestured to the board members who were all staring at copies of that exact legal document. "As the board has just verified," I continued, my voice ringing with absolute authority. 100% of the voting shares were transferred to my private limited liability company. You do not own a single desk computer or paperclip in this building. You are not a founder. You are not the chief executive officer. David stared at the document, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic. The men he had spent years trying to impress were currently reading the cold, hard proof of his total financial failure. "For the past 3 years," I said, leaning forward, "you have been a salaried employee. Your official title is Director of Public Relations. You are a highly paid mascot. I kept you on the payroll because it amused me to let you play the big man at the country club while I ran the enterprise behind the scenes. But unfortunately, your performance review is completely unacceptable." David was shaking. His hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. "This is fraud," he stammered, looking wildly around the room. "You manipulated me when I was vulnerable. I built this place. I run the daily operations. I demand some respect." "Respect," I repeated, raising a single eyebrow. That is a fascinating word choice for a man who has been actively stealing from his own employer. The boardroom collectively held its breath. David froze, his eyes widening in raw terror. I picked up a second folder, this one marked with a bright red confidential sticker. I spread the documents out for the board to see. "As the sole owner of this company, I ordered a complete forensic audit of our accounts last week," I announced. "The auditors finished their sweep last night. They found highly concerning discrepancies in the public relations budget. It seems," I continued, my voice dripping with icy contempt, "that you have been submitting fraudulent invoices for fake marketing events. You have been funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars through a shell vendor. And what exactly were those embezzled corporate funds actually paying for?" I pulled out a glossy photograph and slid it across the table. "It was a picture of a secret apartment you leased with my money to hide your 25-year-old mistress," I declared to the entire board. The glossy photograph sat in the center of the mahogany table like an active grenade. 12 board members leaned forward, their eyes darting from the image of the luxury downtown loft to the terrified face of the man who secretly funded it. David opened his mouth, his jaw working frantically, but no sound materialized. The charismatic facade he had weaponized for years evaporated under the harsh fluorescent lights of the boardroom. I did not wait. I signaled to my chief financial officer, who distributed the audit summary to every seat at the table. As you can see on page 4. I continued, my voice sharp and unwavering. The funds were funneled through a fictitious marketing vendor directly into a private real estate holding account. The lease for this luxury apartment is signed by David. The secondary resident listed is a 25-year-old woman with absolutely no employment history at this firm. You used corporate assets to bankroll your infidelity. That is not just a massive breach of marital trust. It is grand larceny. David slammed his fist against the table, a desperate attempt to regain control. This is a setup, he shouted loudly, his voice cracking with panic. You manufactured these documents to frame me because you are a jealous, vindictive wife. I demand an independent investigation immediately. My attorney, Sarah, let out a dry, echoing laugh. We already brought in an independent forensic accounting firm, she stated smoothly. They handed their findings directly to federal regulators this morning. You are not facing a jealous wife, David. You are facing an ironclad corporate embezzlement case. I stood up from the executive chair, towering over his seated, shrinking form. David, effective immediately. Your employment as Director of Public Relations is terminated for cause. You are officially stripped of all corporate privileges, benefits, and access. You no longer work for me. I pressed the security button under the lip of the conference table. Before David could launch into another defensive tirade, the heavy double doors swung open. 2 massive security guards stepped into the room, their expressions strictly business. They had suffered under David's arrogant management style for 3 years. I knew they would deeply enjoy this assignment. Escort this former employee to his office, I instructed the guards. Provide him with 1 standard cardboard box. He is permitted to remove personal photographs and his golf clubs. Confiscate his corporate smartphone, laptop, and building access badge. If he resists, call the local authorities and have him arrested. You cannot do this to me, David hissed, as the guards grabbed him by both arms and hoisted him out of his leather chair. I built the relationships that keep this place running. I am the face of this company. You were the mask, I corrected coldly. And the mask has just been ripped off. Get him out of my sight. The walk of shame from the executive boardroom to the ground floor was a spectacle I ensured everyone witnessed. I stood in the glass hallway and watched as the guards marched David through the open-plan marketing department. Dozens of employees stopped typing. Telephones were placed on hold. The entire floor watched in absolute silence as the man who had belittled them was paraded past their cubicles. He clutched a single flimsy cardboard box. The security guards systematically stripped him of his corporate phone and his titanium laptop right by the elevator banks. The doors slid shut on his humiliated face, severing his connection to my wealth forever. Out on the concrete sidewalk, the reality of his total ruin crashed into David. He stood shivering in the biting winter wind, holding his pathetic cardboard box, entirely locked out of the empire he claimed as his own. His personal cell phone vibrated in his slacks. He pulled it out, seeing his mother's name flashing brightly on the screen. He answered, swallowing hard to force his voice into a tone of righteous indignation. Martha, he answered immediately, pivoting to his lifelong defense mechanism of absolute denial. I had to get out of there. Olivia has lost her mind. She created an incredibly toxic work environment just to punish me for her own insecurities. I could not take the abuse for 1 more second, so I quit. I threw my badge on her desk and I walked out. I am taking a moral stand against her tyranny. Martha gasped, fully buying into his completely fabricated victimhood. Oh, my poor boy, she cried aloud. You did the right thing. We do not need her toxic money. You are a brilliant businessman and will rebuild without her. We will ruin her reputation at the country club tonight. David nodded, gripping his cardboard box tighter. Exactly, Mother. We will destroy her completely. While David spun his web of lies on the sidewalk, his daughter Chloe was facing a much more immediate catastrophe across town. She sat on her friend's stained sofa, staring at the red suspension notice on her laptop screen. The university demanded $40,000 by the end of the business day, or she would be permanently expelled. She tried calling David 20 times, but his corporate phone was disconnected, and his personal phone went straight to voicemail. Panic clawed at her throat. She refused to lose her elite social status. She refused to be a college dropout. Desperation always breeds reckless decisions. Chloe opened a new browser tab and navigated to a high-interest predatory lending website she heard whispers about from classmates. The site promised instant approval for massive personal loans with zero collateral provided she had a wealthy co-signer. Her eyes darted around the empty room. She pulled up a digital loan application and began typing frantically. In the co-signer section, she entered David's full legal name, his social security number which she memorized years ago, and his listed annual income. With a trembling finger, she digitally forged his signature on a loan carrying a devastating 40% interest rate and hit submit. The loading icon on Chloe's laptop screen spun in a continuous agonizing circle. She gnawed on her manicured thumbnail, waiting for the instant approval the predatory lending website had promised. Instead of a green confirmation checkmark, a bold red error message flashed across the screen, indicating that a verbal verification was required for the co-signer. Across town, David was still shivering on the cold concrete sidewalk outside my corporate headquarters, clutching his pathetic cardboard box. His personal cell phone vibrated violently in his pocket. Desperate for any good news, he snatched it up and answered. A highly aggressive loan officer from the predatory lending firm did not bother with pleasantries. The agent bluntly informed David that an application for a $40,000 high-interest student loan had just been submitted with his digital signature. David froze his mind, struggling to process the information. Before he could even formulate a lie to deny his involvement, the loan officer delivered the fatal blow. The agent laughed a harsh, mocking sound and stated that the application was instantly rejected because David's credit score was utterly abysmal. The agent specifically cited the sealed bankruptcy filing from 3 years ago, a massive financial black mark that rendered David completely ineligible to borrow a single dime. David dropped his phone on the pavement. The screen shattered, mirroring his entirely ruined life. Back in her friend's dingy apartment, Chloe received the automated rejection email. She stared at the harsh black text outlining the exact reason for the denial. The words "undischarged bankruptcy" glared back at her. Chloe shook her head violently. Her father was a wealthy tech chief executive officer. He bought her designer bags and paid for her luxury car. He was the golden provider of their prestigious country club family. She convinced herself there was a massive banking error, perhaps a side effect of my malicious financial freeze. Chloe remembered a specific address she had seen on a piece of high-end real estate mail poking out of David's briefcase a few weeks prior. She had assumed it was an investment property, a luxury downtown loft he was buying to expand his portfolio. Convinced her father was secretly hoarding cash at this private location to protect it from my grasp, Chloe ordered the cheapest rideshare available and headed straight for the city center. She arrived at the exclusive residential building and bypassed the lobby security desk by closely tailgating a wealthy resident through the glass doors. She rode the elevator to the penthouse floor, her heart pounding with a mixture of righteous anger and sheer desperation. She marched down the carpeted hallway and found the door to the loft slightly ajar. David had rushed inside in such a blind panic after his public humiliation at my office that he completely failed to engage the deadbolt. Chloe pushed the heavy oak door open and stormed right into the spacious, sunlit living room. "Dad, you need to give me $40,000 right now," she demanded, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. She stopped dead in her tracks. The luxury loft was not a secret financial vault. It was a lavish love nest. David was standing by a crystal bar cart pouring a massive glass of scotch with trembling hands. Sitting comfortably on a white leather sectional sofa was a young woman who looked barely older than Chloe herself. The 25-year-old mistress was lounging in a silk robe sipping a mimosa. But what made the blood drain entirely from Chloe's face was the jewelry sparkling around the young woman's neck. It was a vintage diamond-encrusted Cartier pendant. It was the exact same priceless heirloom necklace Chloe had violently accused me of stealing and hiding from her just a few weeks ago. The illusion of the perfect wealthy father completely shattered into a million jagged pieces. Chloe looked from the stolen diamond necklace to the young mistress, and finally to the terrified, pathetic man holding the scotch glass. "You are not hoarding cash," Chloe whispered, her voice rising into a hysterical shriek. You are a complete fraud. You let me scream at Olivia for taking my things when you were stealing them to give to your cheap mistress. The rejection email was right. You are totally bankrupt. David lunged forward, raising his hands in a desperate plea for silence. Keep your voice down, he hissed, glancing nervously at the open door. I can explain everything. I am working on a new business deal. I just need a little time to get the capital together. The mistress scoffed loudly, crossing her legs on the white leather sofa. You told me you owned that massive tech company, David, she sneered, examining her perfectly manicured nails. You told me your crazy wife was just a consultant. If you are broke, I am taking this necklace to a pawn shop today and you can lose my number. The unholy alliance of the antagonists began to fracture violently from the inside out. Chloe stomped her foot, her eyes blazing with furious entitlement. I do not care about your pathetic girlfriend, she screamed at her father. I need my tuition money by 5 o'clock. You are going to write me a check for $50,000 to keep my mouth shut. If you do not hand over the cash right now, I am going straight to Grandma Martha. I will tell her and the entire country club that her precious, successful son is a bankrupt, cheating loser who lives on his wife's charity. David dropped to his knees, utterly broken. He buried his face in his hands and sobbed openly on the expensive hardwood floor. I do not have it, he wept miserably. I do not have a single cent. Olivia took everything. She fired me. She cut off the accounts. I am completely ruined. Chloe stared at her father, sobbing on the floor. The terrifying reality finally set in. There was no secret trust fund. There was no hidden cash. She was entirely on her own, staring down the barrel of a ruined social life and immediate academic expulsion. She turned around and sprinted out of the loft, slamming the heavy door behind her, leaving her father to grovel on the floor, while his mistress began packing her bags. Completely oblivious to the spectacular implosion of her son and granddaughter, Martha was sitting comfortably in the sunroom of her sprawling estate. She was dressed in her finest tennis whites, sipping Earl Grey tea from a bone china cup. Her phone was buzzing with gossip, but she was entirely focused on her grand retaliation. She sat at her antique writing desk, meticulously addressing thick cream-colored envelopes with her expensive fountain pen. Martha was orchestrating her ultimate social maneuver. She was sending out exclusive invitations for a highly publicized charity gala to be held in the main ballroom of the country club. The ostensible purpose of this elegant gathering was to raise emergency funds for a prominent family facing a sudden tragic domestic crisis. She intended to leverage her old money reputation to bleed the city's elite for cash, planning to publicly humiliate me and secure enough donations to fund Chloe's education and her own lavish lifestyle. She sealed the final gold-embossed envelope, smiling with toxic satisfaction, entirely unaware that the devastating truth was already hurtling toward her perfect world. The gold-embossed envelopes landed on the mahogany desks of the city elite within 48 hours. Martha had spared absolutely no expense on the postage or the premium cardstock, charging the entire printing bill to a credit card she erroneously believed was still linked to my defunct family trust account. The invitations requested the honor of their presence at the prestigious country club ballroom for a charity gala. The stated cause was vague but highly manipulative, citing an urgent effort to raise emergency support for a prominent family facing a sudden tragic domestic crisis. It was a masterclass in high society warfare. Martha was intentionally weaponizing the charitable instincts of the wealthy to publicly brand me as an abusive, out-of-control spouse who was starving her innocent family. She specifically targeted the guest list mailing invitations to my most lucrative wealth management clients, local politicians, and the chief executives of competing financial firms. Her goal was absolute social and professional annihilation. She wanted my clients to look at me with disgust, withdraw their portfolios, and redirect their capital into a fraudulent relief fund meant to maintain Chloe's tuition and her own lavish country club lifestyle. Martha underestimated the loyalty I had built over 15 years of doubling my clients' net worth. Wealthy people do not easily turn on the financial advisor who protects their millions, especially not based on the vague weeping of a gossipy socialite. I was reviewing a quarterly portfolio report in my corner office when my private line rang. It was Beatrice, a billionaire real estate developer and one of my oldest clients. She did not bother with small talk. She simply informed me that Martha had sent her an invitation to a crisis gala. Beatrice scoffed at the blatant attempt to solicit petty cash and immediately forwarded high-resolution photographs of the invitation to my private email. I stared at the elegant calligraphy on my monitor, my eyes narrowing at the sheer audacity of my mother. I pressed the intercom button and summoned my attorney Sarah into the room. I turned the monitor so she could read the invitation. Sarah leaned over the desk, reading the flowery language describing the family's supposed sudden financial destitution. A predatory smile spread across Sarah's face. Martha is attempting to extort your clients in a public venue to cover her own personal expenses, Sarah stated, her legal mind racing. This is not just defamation. It is a highly publicized, documented attempt at financial fraud. And because she invited your professional clients to a public venue, she has completely waived any expectation of privacy. Olivia, this is the silver bullet. We do not have to drag David through a drawn-out court battle. We can execute the post-nuptial agreement, the eviction, and the divorce simultaneously on her stage. The plan crystallized instantly. If Martha wanted to host a theatrical production to humiliate me, I was going to provide the grand finale. I spent the next 3 days orchestrating a flawless, legally bulletproof counterattack. I did not rely on amateur tactics. I reached out to a premium corporate events company and hired their top-tier audio-visual technicians. I paid triple their standard rate to infiltrate the country club ballroom under the guise of an upgraded charity presentation team. They seamlessly integrated my encrypted flash drives into the club's main projection system, linking the massive high-definition screens directly to a remote trigger I could control from the palm of my hand. Every financial document, bank statement, and piece of audio evidence was loaded, formatted, and ready to be projected at 50 feet wide. Next, Sarah contacted the most relentless process service firm in the city. We hired 3 professionals who specialized in high-profile corporate ambushes. They were instructed to wear custom-tailored black tuxedos to blend perfectly into the gala crowd. Their briefcases contained the absolute destruction of my antagonists. The divorce papers invoking the infidelity and fraud clauses of the post-nuptial agreement, completely blocking David from receiving a single cent of alimony. The formal notice of Chloe's permanent removal from my educational trusts. And the pièce de résistance, a 72-hour eviction notice for Martha, legally enforcing the fact that her beloved estate actually belonged to my holding company. Every legal trap was set spring-loaded and waiting for the right moment to snap shut. I was standing in my foyer, reviewing the final deployment schedule with Sarah on my tablet, when the front gate chime echoed through the mansion. I pulled up the security feed on the wall monitor. Standing outside my custom iron gates was David. He looked completely different from the red-faced, screaming man who had been escorted out of my corporate headquarters by security just days ago. His hair was perfectly slicked back. He was wearing his best tailored suit, the one I bought him for our anniversary. In his hands he held a massive, ostentatious bouquet of white orchids, my favorite flower. He pressed the intercom button, staring directly into the camera lens with wide puppy dog eyes. Olivia. His voice crackled through the speaker, dripping with artificial remorse and calculated vulnerability. Please let me in. I am so incredibly sorry for everything. I know I was wrong. I know I overreacted. I just want to come home and fix our marriage. Sarah looked at the monitor and let out a scoff of pure disgust. He is completely broke. His credit is destroyed, and his mistress likely kicked him to the curb the second she realized he could not pay her rent, Sarah whispered. He is crawling back to manipulate you before his mother's gala tonight. I stared at his pathetic, pleading face on the screen. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I reached out and pressed the gate release button. Let him in, I said, my voice cold and steady. I want to look him in the eye when I set the final trap today. The heavy wrought iron gates swung open with a mechanical hum, allowing David to strut up the driveway of my estate. I stood in the grand foyer watching his approach through the glass panels. He walked with his signature arrogant swagger, carefully adjusting his custom suit. He held the massive arrangement of white orchids like a shield, completely oblivious to the fact that he was walking straight into a meticulously calculated slaughter. I took a deep breath, smoothed my features into a mask of total serenity, and pulled the door open. David launched into his practiced performance. He let out a heavy sigh, drooping his shoulders to project exhaustion and profound vulnerability. "Olivia," he murmured, his voice dripping with artificial regret. "Thank you for letting me in. I have not slept a single minute since our argument. I know things got out of hand, and I am here to take responsibility." He stepped into the foyer and offered the orchids. I accepted the expensive arrangement, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. The flowers smelled sickeningly sweet. "I have been thinking about everything," David continued, stepping closer to invade my personal space. "I know my mother went too far by organizing this charity gala tonight. She is overreacting, trying to make a public spectacle out of a private marital disagreement. But I can stop her, Olivia. I can make a phone call right now and shut the entire event down before anyone from your professional circle shows up. We can cancel the caterers, turn away the guests, and keep our private lives out of the local gossip columns." He paused, framing his extortion as a loving rescue mission. "All I want is for us to go back to normal," he said softly. "I forgive you for your outbursts. I know you were just lashing out because you felt insecure. If you log into the portal, transfer the company shares back into my name, and reactivate my credit cards, I will handle my mother. I will protect your reputation. We can put this ugly misunderstanding behind us and rebuild our marriage." It was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation. He was entirely broke, sleeping in a motel and facing a corporate fraud investigation. Yet he stood in my foyer offering to forgive me for cutting off his stolen funds. He truly believed I was a weak, emotional woman, desperate to avoid a public scandal. He expected me to burst into grateful tears, hand him back the keys to my empire, and beg for protection. I did not throw him out. I did not scream or laugh in his face. Instead, I gave him exactly what he wanted to see. I relaxed my posture, letting my shoulders drop, and looked down at the white orchids. I forced a soft, warm smile onto my lips and gazed up at him with wide, understanding eyes. "You are right, David," I said, keeping my voice gentle and submissive. "We have let things spiral completely out of control. It is time to clear the air once and for all. But you do not need to call your mother and cancel the gala." David frowned, his fake smile faltering. "What do you mean?" he asked nervously. I stepped back and cradled the flowers against my chest. "I want to be there," I replied smoothly. "Let us talk about our future tonight at your mother's gala. In fact, I have prepared a very special surprise for everyone. It will settle everything between us permanently." The greed instantly returned to his eyes. He heard the word surprise and immediately translated it into total victory. He assumed I was planning to publicly apologize, hand him a massive check, and restore his fraudulent status in front of the entire country club. His chest puffed out with undeniable triumph. "I will see you tonight, darling," David said, his arrogant swagger fully restored. "Wear something nice. We have a lot to celebrate." I watched him turn around and march back down the driveway. I kept my warm smile locked in place until he reached the bottom of the steps. As he walked toward the street, he immediately pulled his smartphone out of his pocket. He was so eager to brag about his success that he did not even wait to leave the property boundaries. I tapped the security monitor on the foyer wall, activating the directional microphones installed near the front gate. David's voice came through the hidden speakers, crystal clear and brimming with toxic joy. "Baby, pack your bags," David boasted loudly to the person on the other line. "Yes, I am serious." The dumb, emotional wife bought the whole act. She practically begged me to come to the gala tonight. She is going to hand the company right back to me to avoid a social scandal. "Give me 24 hours to secure the funds, and we are going shopping for that diamond bracelet you wanted. I told you she was weak. I have her completely under my control." The gate clicked shut behind him, cutting off his pathetic, delusional bragging. My warm smile vanished, instantly replaced by a gaze made of pure ice. I looked down at the bouquet of expensive white orchids resting in my arms. Without a single moment of hesitation, I walked straight into the kitchen, opened the lid of the stainless steel garbage can, and shoved the entire arrangement into the trash. I brushed a stray petal off my sleeve and headed upstairs to my dressing room. The time for playing defense was over. I bypassed the conservative navy suits I usually wore to country club events. Instead, I reached into the back of my closet and pulled out a garment bag containing a custom-fitted blood-red designer gown. The fabric was stunning, aggressive, and undeniably powerful. It was not a dress meant for blending in. It was a dress meant for a public execution. I zipped up the revenge dress, slipped my feet into intimidating stilettos, and applied a sharp coat of matching red lipstick. I checked my reflection in the full-length mirror. I looked exactly like the predator David's family was about to face. My phone buzzed with a message from Sarah confirming the audio-visual technicians and process servers were perfectly positioned at the venue. I grabbed my diamond. Clutch walked out the front door and stepped gracefully into the back of my waiting chauffeured car. "Take me to the country club," I instructed the driver. "It is time to burn their empire to the ground." The tires of my chauffeured car crunched softly against the pristine gravel of the country club driveway. Through the tinted windows, I observed the fleet of luxury vehicles handed over to the valets. The city elite had turned out in full force. Martha had successfully gathered the wealthiest, most influential individuals in our social circle, including several of my most high-net-worth clients. They were all inside, sipping champagne and preparing to open their checkbooks for a manufactured tragedy. I stepped out of the car, adjusting the drape of my blood-red designer gown. The cold night air felt invigorating against my bare shoulders. I bypassed the valet stand and walked directly up the wide stone steps toward the main grand entrance. The club manager recognized me instantly, his eyes widening in alarm as he reached for the heavy mahogany double doors. He knew the narrative Martha was spinning inside, and he knew my arrival meant an imminent collision. I stepped into the opulent foyer and listened. From the main ballroom, Martha's amplified voice echoed through the high vaulted ceilings. She was currently delivering the performance of a lifetime. I walked silently toward the arched entryway and observed the spectacle. The ballroom was packed with old money families, hedge fund managers, and local politicians seated at tables adorned with massive floral centerpieces. On the brightly lit stage at the front of the room stood Martha. She clutched an antique lace handkerchief, dabbing delicately at her dry eyes. "My son and I have been subjected to the most unimaginable cruelty." Martha wept into the microphone, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. Generational wealth carefully preserved by our family for decades was suddenly and maliciously seized. We welcomed a woman into our home, gave her our name, and she repaid us by legally manipulating my son and stripping us of our legacy. She left my innocent granddaughter with nothing, forcing a brilliant young student to the brink of academic ruin. The crowd murmured in synchronized wealthy sympathy. Women adjusted their diamond necklaces while their husbands shook their heads in dignified disgust. Martha was playing them perfectly, using the exact buzzwords that terrified the elite class: stolen legacy, elder abuse, financial manipulation. She painted me as a ruthless gold digger who managed to hold a powerful family hostage. I watched my clients sitting at the front tables, their expressions a mixture of confusion and concern. It was the perfect moment to shatter the illusion. I signaled to the usher standing by the mahogany doors. He pulled them wide open. I stepped over the threshold and into the ballroom. I did not sneak in or stick to the shadows. I walked straight down the center aisle, my stilettos clicking rhythmically against the polished hardwood floor. The blood-red fabric of my gown flowed behind me, a stark, violent contrast to the sea of conservative black tuxedos and pastel evening dresses. The reaction was instantaneous. A woman seated near the back gasped loudly. Heads began to turn one by one, following the direction of her shocked stare. The murmurs of sympathy for Martha abruptly died in their throats. The room fell completely, suffocatingly silent. The only sound left in the massive ballroom was the steady, confident click of my heels approaching the stage. The sea of wealthy patrons naturally parted for me, creating a wide, unobstructed path directly to the front. They stared at my flawless composure, my understated diamond clutch, and the absolute lack of shame or guilt on my face. I radiated power, and the old money elite recognized it immediately. David was standing near the front row, holding a glass of scotch and playing the role of the devastated, brave son. When he saw me walking down the center aisle, the color drained entirely from his face. He remembered the flowers. He remembered my warm smile at the front door. He genuinely believed I had come to surrender to publicly apologize and hand back his fraudulent empire to avoid social embarrassment. But the red dress and my icy expression screamed the exact opposite. Panic seized him. He slammed his scotch glass onto a passing waiter's tray and rushed over to intercept me. He stepped directly into my path, his chest heaving, trying to block my route to the stage. "Olivia, what are you doing?" he whispered fiercely, his hands hovering nervously near my arms. "You said we were going to fix this. You said we were going to talk about our future. Turn around and walk out right now, or get up there and tell them you made a massive mistake. If you ruin this for my mother, I swear I will destroy you." I did not break my stride. I did not blink. I did not even turn my head to acknowledge his presence. I simply kept walking, my shoulder violently brushing past his chest as I shoved him out of my way. He stumbled backward, his polished facade cracking as the surrounding guests watched him fail to control his own wife. I ignored his desperate, furious whispering entirely. My eyes remained locked on the stage. Martha had stopped speaking. She stood frozen behind the podium, her lace handkerchief suspended in mid-air. The fabricated tears instantly dried up as she watched me ascend the short flight of stairs leading to the stage. She looked wildly toward the wings, searching for security, but the audio-visual technicians I had hired were already in position, blocking the venue staff from intervening. I stepped onto the platform, my posture perfectly straight, towering over her shrinking form. Martha opened her mouth to speak, but her voice failed her entirely. She backed away, her hands trembling violently as the reality of her impending doom finally registered. I walked calmly across the polished wooden stage, stopped directly in front of her, and reached out. Without breaking eye contact, I smoothly took the microphone right out of her trembling hand. Now the final act truly begins. I stood at the center of the brightly lit stage, holding the sleek microphone firmly in my right hand. Martha remained paralyzed just a few feet away, her mouth slightly parted, unable to comprehend the sudden shift in gravity. The massive ballroom was so quiet, I could hear the faint hum of the stage lights above my head. Hundreds of the most powerful people in the city stared up at me, their champagne glasses resting untouched on crisp white tablecloths. I did not rush the moment. I let the heavy, suffocating silence stretch for several agonizing seconds, ensuring every single pair of eyes was locked securely onto my blood-red designer gown. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice, calm and perfectly amplified, washed over the massive crowd with absolute, undeniable authority. "My mother-in-law speaks of stolen wealth." I began, letting the harsh words resonate through the premium venue speakers. "She stands before you tonight asking for your sympathy and your capital, claiming her prestigious family legacy was maliciously seized by a cruel outsider. She tells a very compelling story of elder abuse and extreme financial manipulation. It is a story purposefully designed to prey on your deepest fears about preserving your own hard-earned generational wealth. But we are all intelligent business professionals sitting in this room tonight. We know that emotional stories are entirely subjective. They are easily twisted by desperation, pride, and greed. I agree that we should look very closely at the alleged stolen wealth. However, we are not going to rely on fake tears or dramatic stage performances. We are going to look strictly at the raw data. We are going to look at the numbers. Numbers, unlike family, do not lie. I turned my head slightly, making direct eye contact with the lead technician sitting inside the elevated audio-visual booth at the back of the ballroom. I gave him a single sharp nod. Instantly, the ambient crystal chandeliers in the ballroom dimmed to pitch black. The three massive projection screens suspended directly behind the wooden stage flared to life with blinding high-definition clarity. The bright displays were over 50 feet wide, ensuring that even the guests seated at the very back of the enormous room could read every single line of printed text perfectly. The first document appeared on all three digital screens simultaneously. It was not a vague corporate spreadsheet or a questionable email printout. It was a highly detailed, federally stamped legal document. At the very top of the page, printed in bold, undeniable black ink, were the damning words, "United States Bankruptcy Court." Just below that official seal, The petitioner was listed clearly for all to see. David's full legal name, his social security number redacted to the last 4 digits, and his specific corporate entity were projected for the entire elite society to analyze. I paced slowly across the wide stage, gesturing gracefully toward the massive glowing screens behind me. As you can clearly see, I announced loudly, my voice slicing effortlessly through the rising tension in the air. My husband did not lose his corporate empire to a malicious, hostile takeover last week. He lost it exactly 3 years ago. This is his sealed Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing. 3 years ago, David completely and utterly destroyed his own technology firm. He defaulted on $2 million in corporate debt and failed to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in mandatory federal payroll taxes. He was entirely bankrupt. He had absolutely zero liquid assets, zero steady income, and was facing imminent federal indictment. A collective echoing gasp ripped through the crowded ballroom. The wealthy, elite, powerful people who valued financial integrity and corporate transparency above all else stared up at the massive screens in absolute, unadulterated horror. The grand illusion of David, as a highly successful, brilliant tech chief executive officer, shattered instantly into a million irreparable pieces right in front of them. These were the exact men he played 18 holes of golf with every single Sunday afternoon. These were the wealthy investors he had been actively pitching new business ventures to just a few hours ago over expensive cocktails. Now they were looking at concrete legal proof that he was a complete financial fraud. I looked down from the elevated stage into the sprawling crowd and quickly found David. He was standing exactly where I had violently shoved him earlier, but his arrogant, broad-shouldered posture had completely collapsed inward. His handsome face was entirely gray, drained of all blood and color. He looked exactly like a guilty man standing directly on the wooden gallows. He had spent 36 months lying directly to these influential people, pretending to be a titan of industry, meticulously masking his catastrophic failure behind the tailored Italian suits and imported luxury cars I had purchased for him. The quiet murmurs in the elite crowd grew steadily louder, quickly transforming into angry, indignant whispers that filled the vast room. Prominent real estate moguls and hedge fund managers were pointing directly at him, their wealthy expressions twisting into blatant, unmistakable disgust. He was socially and professionally dead in this city. Martha stumbled backward on the wooden stage, her expensive heels wobbling until she bumped hard into the heavy wooden podium. She clutched her heirloom pearl necklace, her panicked eyes darting desperately between the gigantic bankruptcy filing on the bright screens and the horrified faces of her wealthy friends seated in the audience. Her entire fabricated narrative of being a wealthy, targeted victim had just been completely incinerated in front of her social circle. I did not give them a single precious second to recover their composure or formulate a brand new lie to feed the crowd. I pressed the small remote clicker hidden discreetly in the palm of my hand. The massive screens transitioned with a sharp visual flash. Now I stated coldly into the microphone, "Let us look at where the family trust money actually came from." The massive digital screens behind me flickered, shifting from the stark black and white of the federal bankruptcy filing to a vibrant, highly detailed series of financial spreadsheets. These were my personal wealth management accounts, carefully redacted to protect my clients, but leaving the routing numbers and payee designations brilliantly clear. The numbers glowing on the screens were massive, representing hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing out of my accounts over the past 36 months. I walked across the stage, my heels clicking sharply against the polished wood, and pointed to the largest column on the far left screen. For the past 3 years, my mother-in-law has been boasting to everyone in this room about her generational wealth. I announced, my voice amplified and echoing through the silent ballroom. She claimed her son was a titan of industry who generously funded the prestigious family trust. Let us examine that trust. As you can clearly read on these certified bank statements, 100% of the money funding this family came directly from my personal consulting income. There is no family trust. There is no old money. There is only my paycheck. I pressed the remote clicker in my hand. The spreadsheet zoomed in, highlighting a series of highly specific, incredibly embarrassing transactions. I did not just pay for groceries and electricity. I continued letting my gaze sweep over the horrified faces of the country club elite. I funded the entire facade. Martha, for example, has been using my money to maintain her physical appearance while claiming it was good genetics. I pointed to a highlighted row. Here is the $45,000 wire transfer I sent to a private clinic in Beverly Hills for Martha's highly secretive cosmetic surgeries last spring. The exact surgeries she told her bridge club were just the result of a 2-week spa retreat in Switzerland. Martha let out a strangled, breathless gasp. She slapped her hands over her face, shrinking backward as the wealthy women sitting in the front row stared at her with open, undeniable revulsion. The illusion of her natural aging grace was completely shattered. She was a fraud bought and paid for by the working-class woman she constantly belittled. I clicked the remote again, shifting the focus to a new set of highlighted transactions. And then, there is my sister-in-law, Jessica, I stated clearly. She loves to project the image of a successful boutique owner. She claims her brother invested in her brilliant business mind. The reality is far less glamorous. Here are the bank records showing my direct payments to resolve her staggering illegal gambling debts. I paid $60,000 to keep bookmakers from breaking her legs, while she told all of you she was simply restructuring her corporate assets. Jessica was standing near the buffet tables. When the crowd turned to look at her, she physically cowered, trying to hide behind a floral arrangement. The prominent investors and socialites who had previously humored her fake business ventures now looked at her with pure, unfiltered disgust. In their world, financial instability was a flaw, but gambling away borrowed money was an unforgivable sin. She was instantly blacklisted from their social circle. I clicked to the final highlighted section. Finally, we have my stepdaughter, Chloe. She enjoys driving a $70,000 luxury vehicle and attending a private university that costs $40,000 a semester. David told everyone he was providing for his little girl. The truth is, I leased that car under my name. I paid that tuition from my checking account. And yesterday, when I finally cut off the financial pipeline, Chloe was permanently suspended from her university, and her luxury vehicle was repossessed from my driveway. The ballroom remained dead quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy and suffocating. The elite crowd in this room valued financial integrity and self-made wealth above absolutely everything else. They despised parasites. They abhorred grifters who used the country club to prey on genuine success. The collective judgment in the room was a physical weight pressing down on David and his family. The prominent real estate developers, the hedge fund managers, and the politicians physically shifted their chairs, turning their backs toward David. He was completely isolated, standing alone in a sea of people who now viewed him as a toxic, infectious disease. He and his family were socially dead in this city. They would never be invited to another gala, never be approved for another loan, and never be acknowledged in polite society again. The absolute reality of his total destruction finally snapped whatever fragile thread of sanity David had left. He could not handle the public humiliation. He refused to accept that the working-class woman he thought he controlled had just orchestrated his complete and total ruin in front of his peers. David lunged forward, his face purple with rage. He pointed a trembling, sweaty finger at the glowing screens above my head. "Those are fake!" he screamed, his voice cracking hysterically as it echoed through the massive ballroom. "She manufactured every single one of those documents. My wife is a psychotic, jealous liar. She hired hackers to forge those bank statements just to ruin my mother's charity event. Do not believe a single word she says. I own everything. I am the provider. She is making all of this up." I stood perfectly still on the elevated stage. I did not flinch at his desperate, screaming outburst. I simply looked down at him, my expression radiating absolute freezing calm. A slow, sharp smile spread across my face, revealing my total dominance over the situation. I thought you might say that I replied smoothly into the microphone, my voice slicing right through his pathetic temper tantrum. So let us listen to what you have to say about it. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers, signaling the audio-visual booth at the back of the ballroom. The enormous digital financial spreadsheets instantly faded to black. The ballroom was plunged into temporary darkness, amplifying the sheer terror radiating from the stage. David stood frozen, chest-heaving, eyes darting frantically. He had accused me of forging documents banking on the idea that financial records could be manipulated. He forgot I operated with absolute precision. I brought his own unfiltered, arrogant voice. When I fired him yesterday, I had security pull archived surveillance footage from his office. He completely forgot the security cameras recorded high-definition audio. He regularly treated his office like a confession booth, bragging to his sleazy associates and his young mistress over the phone. The surround sound speakers cracked to life with a quiet hum. Then David's voice boomed through the venue. It was not the polished tone he used when schmoozing wealthy investors. It was the crude, arrogant sneer he reserved for moments he thought no one was listening. The recording captured a phone conversation from 2 weeks ago. "Do not worry about cash flow, baby." David's recorded voice echoed off the chandeliers, speaking to his mistress. "My mother and sister are just absolute leeches. They bleed me dry every month. But it is fine. I just let Olivia throw money at them to shut them up. It keeps them off my back and keeps the old woman from asking questions. She is so obsessed with her country club image that she does not care whose checking account is actually funding her tea parties." A gasp ripped through the audience. I looked directly at Martha. The elderly matriarch looked like she had been struck by a train. The son she had worshipped had just publicly reduced her to a pathetic, money-hungry parasite in front of her high society network. But the recording was not finished. "And what about Chloe?" The mistress's voice whined. "You spend a fortune on her." David's recorded laughter was cruel. "Chloe is too stupid to realize I am completely broke," his voice declared. "She has zero brains and zero loyalty. All you have to do is lease her a fancy car and buy designer bags, and she will call Olivia Mom on command. She is essentially a show dog. As long as the tuition gets paid and the credit card works, that spoiled brat will blindly support whoever signs the checks. I am using Olivia's bank accounts to keep Chloe distracted while I secure my exit strategy." The audio went dead, leaving a ringing, catastrophic silence. I stood perfectly still on the stage, watching the absolute destruction of their unholy alliance. The fragile bond holding these grifters together evaporated the instant they realized they were all just using each other. There was no loyalty. There was no prestigious family legacy. There was only greed, and David had just admitted to orchestrating all of it. Chloe was the first to snap. The illusion of her loving, wealthy father had been violently ripped away, replaced by the humiliating reality that she was nothing but a pawn. He viewed with contempt. She let out a guttural shriek. She grabbed a crystal champagne flute from a nearby table, reared her arm back, and hurled it directly at David's head. The heavy glass missed his temple by an inch, shattering explosively against the wooden podium behind him. Shards of crystal rained down on the stage. "You told her I was a stupid show dog!" Chloe screamed, her face contorting with terrifying fury. "You bankrupt, lying loser. You let me humiliate myself fighting for your bags and your money, and you did not even own them. You used me." Before David could raise his hands to defend himself, Jessica launched herself across the stage. The sister who had demanded $15,000 European vacations 48 hours ago transformed into a violent, screaming banshee. She shoved David hard in the chest, her manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. "You called me a leech," Jessica roared. "You pathetic fraud. You paraded around town pretending you were a millionaire tech genius, while actually begging your wife to pay my bills. You ruined my reputation. You destroyed my life." Martha did not scream. The elderly woman simply collapsed against the stage railing, clutching her chest in breathless horror. Her carefully constructed high society persona dissolved into absolute ruin. She stared at her son with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. She realized the elite crowd watching this spectacle would never forgive this humiliation. David was frantically trying to push his screaming sister away, backing toward the edge of the stage. He looked out at the audience, pleading for help, but the wealthy investors and socialites stared back with icy, unforgiving judgment. No one was going to save him. I stepped back, allowing the chaotic, violent implosion to unfold. They were physically tearing each other apart, destroying their own family unit with the very lies they had cultivated. It was a flawless, self-executing punishment, but the night was not quite over. I watched them scream and claw at each other, their voices echoing through the grand ballroom. David stumbled backward, desperately attempting to shield his face from Jessica's relentless attacks. Chloe grabbed another glass from a passing waiter, ready to hurl it at her father. Security guards stationed near the exits hesitated, unsure whether to intervene in a domestic dispute. I kept my eyes fixed on the heavy mahogany doors at the left side of the room. Right on schedule. The ornate doors swung open with a heavy thud. Three tall, broad-shouldered men stepped into the chaotic ballroom. They wore sharp, identical black suits and dark ties, moving with a predatory purpose. They did not look like security or wealthy guests. They looked like professional executioners. Each man carried a thick, legally sealed manila envelope containing absolute legal devastation for the parasites on stage. The ruthless process servers had finally arrived here tonight. The three men in black suits moved through the crowded ballroom with lethal precision. They walked with the synchronized, untouchable confidence of professionals who were entirely accustomed to delivering catastrophic news to wealthy people. The elite guests, still reeling from the explosive audio recording and the violent physical altercation on the stage, naturally parted to create a clear path for them. The men ascended the short wooden stairs to the platform. The sheer physical presence of these three towering figures caused the frantic, screaming family to freeze in their tracks. David dropped his hands, backing away from his sister. Jessica stopped clawing at her brother's jacket, gasping for breath. Martha remained slumped against the railing, her eyes darting wildly toward the intruders. The lead process server, a man with a stern jawline and zero trace of emotion, stepped directly in front of David. He raised a thick, heavy manila envelope and pressed it firmly against David's chest, forcing the ruined man to take it. The second process server moved swiftly toward the railing, extending an identical heavy envelope down to Martha. Her trembling, wrinkled hands instinctively grabbed the thick package. The third server walked right up to Jessica, shoving the final envelope into her hands before she could even utter a word of protest. Having successfully executed their assigned legal drops, the three men turned in perfect unison, descended the wooden stairs, and walked straight out of the ballroom, leaving the heavy mahogany doors swinging shut behind them. The sudden, chilling silence returned to the massive venue. David stared down at the thick envelope in his hands. His name was printed in bold black ink across the front. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a profound, suffocating panic. I raised the microphone back to my lips. My voice echoed through the silent, expectant room, slicing through the heavy tension like a sharpened blade. David, I announced clearly, making sure every single investor, real estate mogul, and country club socialite heard every single syllable. Those are your official divorce papers. They have been filed with the state Supreme Court this evening. I am invoking the strict infidelity and massive financial fraud clauses explicitly detailed in our ironclad post-nuptial agreement. You broke the terms of our legal contract the moment you funneled my corporate capital to your secret downtown apartment to fund your young mistress. Because you violated those specific clauses, the legal penalty is absolute. You forfeit any right to dispute the division of assets. You get absolutely zero alimony. You are walking out of this marriage with the exact same net worth you had when I saved you from federal prison 3 years ago. Nothing. David's knees visibly buckled. He dropped the thick envelope onto the wooden stage floor. The last remaining shred of his arrogant corporate facade completely dissolved. He was a 50-year-old man with a destroyed credit score, a public record of grand larceny, a blown-open bankruptcy, and absolutely no legal avenue to drain a single dime from my accounts. He was utterly, permanently ruined. I did not linger on his pathetic, defeated expression. I smoothly turned my head and locked my gaze onto the elderly woman clutching her envelope against the stage railing. Martha stared back at me, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. She desperately tried to maintain her aristocratic posture, but her knees were shaking so violently she could barely stand upright. And Martha, I continued, my voice dropping to a freezing, lethal register, I highly suggest you open your envelope right now. That is a formal, legally binding 72-hour eviction notice. Martha gasped, her hand flying to her throat. You cannot evict me from my own family estate, she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure desperation. I have lived in that prestigious home for 40 years. It is my generational legacy. You have no legal right to touch my property. I let out a soft, echoing laugh that chilled the entire ballroom. You do not own that property, Martha I stated loudly, watching the absolute horror spread across the faces of her wealthy friends in the front row. You have not owned that magnificent estate for a very long time. 2 years ago, your son completely drained the equity out of your home to cover his mounting corporate failures. He leveraged your precious family legacy into the ground, and the bank quietly foreclosed on the entire property. You were scheduled to be thrown out onto the street in the dead of winter. Martha whipped her head around to glare at David. Her son could not even look her in the eye. He stared at his designer shoes, confirming the devastating truth through his cowardly silence. But I stepped in. I declared, commanding the attention of the entire room once again. I purchased the deed to the estate directly from the bank in a private cash transaction. I paid off the massive debt your son created. For the last 24 months, you have been living completely rent-free in a house that belongs exclusively to my holding company. You are not the matriarch of a wealthy historical lineage, Martha. You have been a charity case living in my guest house, and your lease just expired. You have exactly 3 days to pack your things and vacate my property before the county sheriff physically removes you. The ballroom erupted into fierce, judgmental whispers. The wealthy elite looked at Martha with open, unapologetic disgust. The woman who stood on the stage crying fake tears and begging for charity to preserve her stolen legacy was exposed as a penniless fraud, living on her working-class daughter-in-law's charity. Martha let out an agonizing sob and slid down the railing, collapsing completely onto the floor. Suddenly, Chloe crawled slowly forward, desperately begging for my forgiveness, claiming her father completely brainwashed her young mind and maliciously manipulated all her ignorant thoughts. Chloe's hands reached out, her fingers desperately grasping at the heavy silk fabric of my blood-red designer gown. Tears streamed down her meticulously contoured face, ruining her expensive makeup. She looked up at me from the floor of the stage, abandoning every ounce of the arrogant entitlement she had wielded for the past 3 years. "Olivia, please." Chloe sobbed, her voice cracking as it echoed through the silent ballroom. "You have to listen to me. He made me do it. My dad manipulated me into hating you. He brainwashed me. He told me you were just a consultant trying to steal his money. I did not know he was bankrupt. I did not know you paid for my car and my tuition. Please, Mom, I am so sorry. I love you. Please do not leave me with them. I will do whatever you want. Just give me another chance." The entire ballroom watched the pathetic display. The wealthy elite stared in absolute disgust at the young woman willing to throw her own father under a bus the very second the money ran out. I looked down at her tear-stained face, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no maternal instinct, just the cold clinical observation of a parasite trying to reattach itself to a host. I reached down and firmly pried her trembling fingers off the hem of my gown. I leaned forward, bringing my face close to hers, making sure the microphone captured every single syllable of my final response. "I cannot help you, Chloe," I stated, my voice echoing with a freezing absolute finality. "I am not your mother. Your father said so himself." The callback landed like a physical blow. Chloe let out a devastating wail and collapsed onto the wooden floor, burying her face in her hands. Hearing those exact words spoken back to him completely broke whatever tiny fragment of sanity David still possessed. The realization that his own arrogant insult had become the very weapon that severed his daughter from her luxurious future pushed him right over the edge. "You malicious witch!" David roared, his voice tearing violently from his throat. He dropped his divorce papers and lunged forward. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands curled into tight fists. He intended to physically drag me down from the podium. He never even made it to the first wooden step. The country club security guards had been standing by, watching the entire financial revelation unfold on the massive projection screens. They knew exactly who held the power in this room. They knew David was a bankrupt fraud, and I was the high-net-worth client who could buy and sell this entire establishment. As David charged forward, 4 massive security officers converged on him with ruthless, terrifying efficiency. They did not treat him like a respected club member having a stressful evening. They treated him exactly like a violent, trespassing criminal. 2 guards grabbed his arms, twisting them sharply behind his back, while a third tackled him forcefully to the polished hardwood floor. David hit the ground with a sickening thud, screaming and thrashing against the heavy boots pressing him into the floorboards. "Let me go!" he shrieked, struggling frantically. The head of security leaned down, pressing his knee firmly into David's spine. "Not anymore, buddy," the guard replied coldly. "You are trespassing on private property. Keep resisting and we will gladly break your arms before the police arrive." The violent takedown happened in a matter of seconds. I did not flinch or step back. I simply watched the man who had tried to destroy me get pinned to the ground like a common thug. The destruction of their parasitic alliance was absolute and irreversible. I turned off the microphone and set it gently onto the wooden podium. I turned my back on the screaming, thrashing remnants of my former family and walked gracefully down the steps on the opposite side of the stage. As my stiletto heels clicked against the floor, the massive crowd of investors immediately parted for me. It was a sea of respect and awe. Powerful men nodded their heads in silent approval of my ruthless financial execution. Wealthy women stepped back, ensuring my red dress had a clear path toward the exit. I did not look back. I did not pause to gloat. I walked straight through the grand mahogany double doors and out into the crisp, refreshing night air, leaving the ruined family screaming at each other in the hands of private security. My chauffeured car was waiting precisely where I had left it. I stepped into the leather interior, instructed the driver to take me home, and poured myself a glass of vintage champagne. The following morning, the sun rose over a completely altered landscape. The financial and social fallout from the charity gala hit the city like a localized earthquake. By 8 o'clock, the local news stations were running segments on the chaotic police response at the prestigious country club, referencing a massive corporate fraud scandal tied to a former tech executive. The exclusive group chats shared pictures of the bankruptcy documents mocking the fake charity attempt. The parasites were officially and permanently cut off from society. Martha's phone rang endlessly with calls from angry creditors who had suddenly learned about her foreclosure. Jessica arrived at her fake boutique to find the locks changed by her landlord. And David woke up on a thin plastic mattress in a county holding cell, facing multiple charges for disturbing the peace, resisting arrest, and trespassing, with absolutely zero funds to post his own minimal bail. Their complete removal from civil society was finalized, paving the way for the ultimate legal liquidation of their former lives. I sat in my sunlit dining room, sipping my morning espresso and reading the devastating headlines with satisfaction. I had permanently eradicated the toxic infection that had plagued my life. Now all that remained was successfully executing the final phase of my absolute financial victory. The wheels of justice began turning before the sun reached its peak the next morning. My forensic accountants handed over every shredded invoice, doctored expense report, and a legal wire transfer directly to federal authorities. David was formally indicted by a grand jury within 72 hours. The charges were staggering. He faced multiple counts of corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and grand larceny. The local news stations camped outside his holding cell, broadcasting his miserable, handcuffed perp walk to the entire state. The judge took one look at his flight risk potential and set bail at an astronomical $500,000. Since David did not have a single penny to his name, he sat in that freezing county jail for a week until a sleazy bail bondsman took a predatory chance on him. When David walked out of lockup, smelling of cheap soap and desperation, he dragged his exhausted body straight to the luxury downtown loft. He expected his young mistress to welcome him with open arms and comfort him. Instead, he found the front door swinging wide open. The sprawling apartment had been stripped completely bare. The white leather sectional was gone. The crystal bar cart was empty. The mistress had seen the spectacular viral videos from the country club gala and watched the morning news reports detailing his absolute bankruptcy. She immediately packed up every designer item she could carry, emptied the emergency cash he kept hidden in the safe, and vanished into the city. David was left standing in an empty, echoing room with nothing but the clothes on his back. With his credit score totally obliterated and no assets to leverage, he was forced to rent a filthy motel room on the desolate outskirts of town, trading his tailored suits for unwashed sweatpants. His mother and sister were faring no better. The morning after the gala, a courier arrived at the guest house and handed Martha a thick envelope embossed with the country club seal. It was a formal, irrevocable letter of expulsion signed unanimously by the board of directors. They cited conduct unbecoming of a member and egregious financial misrepresentation. Martha was permanently blacklisted. 2 days later, my 72-hour eviction notice expired. I did not grant them a minute of grace. I dispatched the county sheriff to oversee their immediate removal. The deputies stood on the pristine lawn with their hands resting on their utility belts, coldly instructing Martha and Jessica to pack their pathetic belongings into trash bags. With zero income and their social credit entirely destroyed, the two arrogant women were forced to sign a predatory lease for a cramped apartment in one of the most crime-ridden neighborhoods in the city. The walls were paper-thin, the plumbing leaked, and the heating barely functioned. The women who used to sip expensive champagne and judge the working class were now reduced to screaming at each other over the price of generic groceries. Jessica blamed her mother for raising a fraudulent son, while Martha shrieked that Jessica was a lazy parasite who ruined their family reputation with her illegal gambling debts. They spent their days trapped in that tiny, suffocating apartment, bitterly fighting over pennies and cheap boxed wine, utterly forgotten by the high society friends they had once desperately tried to impress. For Chloe, the harsh reality of her new poverty hit with the force of a speeding freight train. The predatory lending company had officially flagged her fraudulent application and reported the digital forgery. The elite private university received the notification and acted with immediate, unforgiving administrative action. Chloe was formally expelled for non-payment and academic fraud. She was given exactly 2 hours to clear out of her premium campus dormitory. She dragged her cheap suitcases to the curb and frantically texted her wealthy sorority sisters begging for a place to crash. Every single one of them left her on red. The girls she had bought drinks for and chauffeured around had watched the viral videos of her public humiliation. They instantly blocked her number, treating her like a contagious social disease. With no degree, no skills, and no wealthy father, Chloe faced the brutal job market she had always mocked. She spent weeks filling out applications until she secured a minimum wage position working the drive-through window at a fast food chain. She had to trade her designer silk blouses for a scratchy polyester uniform and a greasy visor. Her ultimate humiliation arrived on a busy Friday night when a luxury sports car pulled up to her window. She slid the glass open holding a bag of fries and froze in sheer horror. Sitting in the driver's seat was her former frat boy boyfriend, laughing loudly with two of her old sorority sisters in the back seat. They stared at Chloe in her hideous uniform, pointing and laughing hysterically as she handed over their food with shaking, grease-stained hands. She spent the rest of her shift sobbing quietly over the deep fryer, realizing she was permanently trapped in the working-class life she used to brutally ridicule. A few months passed, bringing the sweet, quiet tranquility of a truly unburdened life. I sat comfortably in my spacious, sunlit office at the newly rebranded wealth management firm, slowly sipping a cup of rich black coffee. Across the polished glass desk sat Sarah, my brilliant corporate attorney, meticulously organizing a towering stack of thick legal documents. The ink on David's final divorce decree was completely dry. The federal criminal investigations were proceeding flawlessly, guaranteeing he would trade his cheap motel room for a federal prison cell. Now it was time to execute the very last administrative sweep. We were finalizing the absolute liquidation of every single piece of real estate associated with that parasitic family. I picked up my gold-plated pen, ready to sign the final property transfer deeds, and permanently close this toxic chapter of my life, forever paving my clear road to ultimate freedom. I pressed the gold-plated pen firmly against the thick stack of property transfer deeds, my signature flowing across the crisp white paper with absolute certainty. Sarah sat across from me, reviewing each notarized document as I handed it over. The liquidation process was a masterclass in ruthless efficiency. I did not hold on to a single asset tied to David or his parasitic family. The sprawling estate where Martha had played pretend matriarch was the first to go. I sold it at a premium to a rival country club family, ensuring Martha would have to watch her bitterest social enemies redecorate her former kingdom. The luxury downtown loft David used to hide his mistress was flipped for a massive profit within 48 hours. Every single piece of David's defunct tech company, from the server racks to the office furniture, was stripped down and auctioned off to the highest bidder. The capital gains from the massive liquidation flooded directly into my primary holding accounts. When the final wire transfer cleared the international banking system, I stared at the glowing numbers on my monitor. I had officially doubled my net worth. The financial dead weight dragging down my portfolio was completely severed. I immediately initiated a total corporate rebranding. The wealth management firm was stripped of any branding that remotely hinted at my brief, disastrous marriage. I legally restored my maiden name across all corporate licenses and federal registrations. The polished glass doors of my executive suite bore my true identity, completely erasing the last microscopic trace of David from my professional and personal life. He was no longer a mistake I had to manage. He was simply a highly profitable transaction that had officially closed. 6 months later, the freezing winter winds of the city were nothing but a distant memory. I stepped out onto the expansive teak deck of a hyper-luxurious 5-star private overwater villa in the Maldives. The warm tropical sun washed over my skin. The crystal-clear Indian Ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, painting the world in breathtaking shades of turquoise and sapphire. There were no ringing office phones, no frantic emails from greedy in-laws, and absolutely no arrogant men demanding access to my hard-earned capital. There was only the gentle, rhythmic sound of the waves lapping against the wooden stilts of my private sanctuary. I settled comfortably onto a plush white linen sunbed, adjusting my designer sunglasses against the brilliant glare of the tropical sun. A private butler silently approached, pouring a generous glass of rare vintage champagne into a crystal flute before bowing respectfully and retreating into the villa. I picked up the glass, feeling the cool condensation against my fingertips, and took a slow, deeply satisfying sip. The crisp, elegant flavor perfectly matched the absolute serenity of my new reality. I had fought a brutal war against manipulation, fraud, and profound entitlement, and I had emerged entirely victorious. My smartphone rested on the small glass table next to my sunbed. It had been blissfully quiet for days, serving only as a device to play soft jazz and check international market trends. Suddenly, the screen illuminated, and the device vibrated harshly against the glass. I glanced over, my expression remaining perfectly calm. The caller identification displayed a restricted number, but the preview of the incoming text message revealed the sender instantly. It was David. Despite his strict legal restrictions and his complete lack of resources, he had managed to smuggle a message to my private number. I did not pick up the phone. I simply leaned my head back against the plush cushion and read the pathetic, desperate words glowing on the locked screen. "Olivia, please," the message began, reeking of profound panic. "I am begging you to read this. The public defender they assigned to me is completely useless. The federal prosecutors are pushing for the maximum prison sentence for the embezzlement charges. I have absolutely nothing left. My mother will not speak to me, and Chloe blocked my number. Please, I know I ruined everything, but I need a second chance. I need money for a real defense attorney. You are the only person who can save me from going to a maximum security facility. I will do whatever you want. Just tell me you will help me." I stared at the glowing text message, watching his absolute desperation bleed through the digital pixels. A year ago, that kind of manipulation might have triggered a fleeting moment of pity. I might have remembered the man I thought I married and felt a twinge of guilt. But sitting under the brilliant tropical sun, surrounded by the undeniable proof of my own hard-earned success, I felt absolutely nothing. The man begging for his life on that screen was a stranger, a convicted fraudster facing the exact unfiltered consequences of his own malicious actions. He had tried to steal my wealth, humiliate my mother's memory, and gaslight me into total submission. Now he wanted me to purchase his freedom. I reached out and picked up the smartphone. I did not open the message to read the rest of his pathetic rambling. I did not type out a vindictive response to gloat over his imminent prison sentence. He was not worth the physical effort of typing a single syllable. I simply tapped the restricted icon, scrolled down the menu with one smooth motion, and firmly pressed the button labeled Block Caller. The screen instantly went black, cutting his toxic voice out of my universe forever. I tossed the silenced phone carelessly into my designer beach bag, effectively burying the past. I leaned back into the luxurious sunbed, closed my eyes, and let the warm golden sunlight wash over my face. I took another sip of the vintage champagne, breathing in the salty ocean air. The parasites were gone. The fortune was secure. I had claimed my absolute untouchable freedom, and the rest of my beautiful life was just beginning. The ultimate lesson from this story is that true empowerment comes from recognizing your own worth and refusing to subsidize your own abuse. Toxic family members will often disguise their financial and emotional parasitism as familial obligation, manipulating your generosity to fund their delusions. True strength is not just about accumulating wealth. It is about establishing unbreakable boundaries and having the courage to walk away from those who only value what you provide, not who you are. You cannot heal in the same environment that broke you. Have you ever cut ties with toxic relatives? Please like, subscribe, and share.